Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! In the dimly lit chamber, a solitary sound broke the thick tension hanging in the air, a soft yet distinct thud. 12 individuals, each with eyes like hawks, fixated on the source. Manila envelopes, indistinguishable from one another, bearing the striking mark of classified in crimson. The imposing presence of Director Harlow commanded the room as she addressed the tense candidates, her gray attire reflecting the unwavering steel in her gaze. "A remarkable feat," she began, acknowledging their progress. "This juncture is a privilege only bestowed upon the rare 2%. Your fates lie within these envelopes, holding the key to your last test, which will determine your true caliber." Among the 12, Matthias Sullivan, aged 32 and a former Marine, delicately handled his folder, reflecting on the arduous months behind him, months filled with trials that would test even the toughest among them. He'd mastered advanced combat techniques, memorized protocols for 15 different crisis scenarios, and passed psychological evaluations designed to break candidates. Nothing had prepared him for what he now read. "Comprehensive disguise and deep cover operations," the header stated in bold letters. Director Harlow's heels clicked against the tile floor as she circled the table. "The most dangerous missions require operatives who can become someone else entirely, not just act the part, but become the part." Matthias flipped through the materials, his brown eyes widening slightly. Pages of photographs showed agents, men and women, transformed beyond recognition. A muscular man appearing as an elderly professor, a petite woman transformed into what appeared to be a Middle Eastern businessman. "This module will push your perceived limitations," Harlow continued. "Some of you will fail. Some will excel. Training begins tomorrow at 0600 hours. Later that evening, in his sparse dormitory room, Matthias studied the materials more carefully. The comprehensive disguise training would last 8 weeks, culminating in a practical field assessment. He'd expected disguise work, false identities, appearance alterations, but the scope of the program surprised him. Under cross-gender presentation, the manual stated, "Field operatives must be versatile in all forms of disguise. Gender transformation techniques provide optimal cover in numerous scenarios and often present unexpected tactical advantages." Matthias ran a hand through his short brown hair, recalling his background. After 8 years in the Marines and 2 in private security, he'd been recruited for this elite program. His physical abilities had never been questioned. At 6 feet tall with a disciplined fitness regimen, he'd always excelled at the tactical aspects of training, but this was different. Could he convincingly become someone else entirely? The next morning arrived with brutal efficiency. The 12 candidates gathered in a specialized facility they hadn't previously accessed. The room resembled a cross between a theatrical costume shop and a high-tech laboratory. A tall woman with short platinum hair approached the group. "I'm Dr. Eliza Reynolds, head of the Comprehensive Disguise Division. For the next 8 weeks, I'll be reconstructing each of you from the ground up." She gestured toward different stations around the room, makeup areas, clothing racks, voice modulation equipment, and what appeared to be gait analysis platforms. "Disguise isn't just about appearance," she explained. "It's about movement, voice, mannerisms, psychological immersion. By the time you complete this module, you'll be capable of transforming so completely that your own mothers wouldn't recognize you." The first week focused on fundamentals. They learned about prosthetics, makeup techniques, and voice modulation. Matthias applied himself with the same determination he brought to every aspect of training. He studied the materials each night, practiced facial expressions in the mirror, and recorded his voice to analyze pitch and inflection. During the second week, Dr. Reynolds divided them into specialty groups. When Matthias received his assignment, he stared at the tablet screen for a long moment. Group C, Advanced Cross-Gender Presentation, it read. 4 candidates, 3 men including himself and 1 woman, had been selected for this track. They were directed to a specialized section of the facility where a new instructor awaited. "Welcome to the most challenging disguise discipline," said a woman with an elegant posture and sharp eyes. "I'm Consultant Vivian Moore. I've spent 20 years in field operations specializing in gender-transformed covers." She assessed the small group with critical precision. "The ability to cross gender lines in your presentation creates unique advantages in the field. Many security protocols are designed with binary gender assumptions. Sophisticated facial recognition systems can be circumvented through proper application of these techniques." The training intensified dramatically. Each morning began with voice modulation exercises, followed by movement training, then makeup and prosthetic application. Afternoons focused on psychological aspects, how to think, react, and embody a completely different persona. During the third week, Matthias found himself sitting in a chair before a large mirror as a specialist worked on his face. "Your bone structure actually gives us some advantages," the technician commented, applying various primers and foundations. "Strong jawline, but with the right contouring." 2 hours later, Matthias barely recognized himself. His features had been softened, eyes enhanced, lips fuller. The brown hair hidden beneath a cap would soon be covered by a wig. "This is just the beginning," Vivian said, observing his reaction. "Tomorrow, we start comprehensive feminine presentation." That night, Matthias lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling. The face that had looked back at him from the mirror wasn't his own. It had been disorienting in a way that combat training never was. He'd always defined himself through physical capability and mental discipline. This training challenged something more fundamental, his very identity. The following day, Matthias entered what the team called the Transformation Studio. Racks of clothing lined one wall, organized by size, style, and scenario classifications. "Today you'll be creating your first female cover identity," Vivian announced. "You'll be assigned a complete profile to embody." A specialist approached Matthias with a tablet. "You've been assigned the identity of Ashlyn Winters, 31, corporate consultant specializing in financial restructuring. Upper middle class background, MBA from Northwestern, lives in Boston." The next 3 hours passed in a blur of instruction and application. Matthias was fitted with silicone breast forms that adhered to his chest, creating a natural feminine contour. His male clothing was replaced by shapewear that redistributed his form, creating the illusion of a feminine waist and hips. "Stand up straighter. No, not military straight. Let your shoulders relax," Vivian instructed as he attempted to walk in low heels. "Your center of gravity has changed. Feel the shift in your hips." By afternoon, Matthias had been fully transformed. He wore a navy blue pencil skirt that ended just below the knee, a cream-colored silk blouse, and nude pumps with a modest 2-inch heel. A blonde wig with loose waves fell just past his shoulders, styled in a professional manner that framed his made-up face. When he looked in the full-length mirror, a stranger looked back. "This isn't about pretending to be a woman," Vivian said firmly, standing behind him. "That's amateur hour. This is about becoming Ashlyn completely. You don't imitate feminine behavior. You inhabit the identity so thoroughly that masculinity becomes the foreign concept." Over the next week, Matthias spent 18 grueling hours each day as Ashlyn. He practiced walking in progressively higher heels, graduating from 2 inches to 3, then eventually to 4-inch stilettos. His feet blistered, his calves burned, but Vivian was relentless. "Your walk is still wrong," she criticized during his 5th day. "You're moving from your shoulders rather than your hips. Again." He walked the length of the training room once more, concentrating on the subtle shift of weight, the placement of each foot directly in front of the other. "Better," Vivian conceded. "Now let's work on sitting. A woman in a pencil skirt doesn't just drop into a chair." The voice training proved equally challenging. Hours were spent on pitch modulation, speech patterns, and the musicality of feminine communication. Matthias discovered muscles in his throat he never knew existed, learning to speak from a different place entirely. "Women tend to use more words when expressing ideas," the vocal coach explained. "They often approach conversation differently, more collaborative, more attuned to emotional undercurrents." By the 5th week, Matthias could transform into Ashlyn in under 90 minutes. The process had become almost routine. The careful application of makeup, the positioning of breast forms, the layering of clothing selected to enhance the feminine illusion. "Today we begin practical application," Vivian announced. "You'll be going into controlled environments to test your cover." Their first excursion was to a simulated corporate office environment within the training facility. Matthias, now fully transformed into Ashlyn, was tasked with retrieving specific information from other operatives playing various roles, none of whom knew his true identity. The cream blouse felt smooth against his skin as he navigated the office scenario. The navy skirt restricted his stride, forcing him to maintain the proper gait he'd practiced for weeks. He found himself automatically adjusting his voice, his posture, his mannerisms, without conscious thought. "Remarkable improvement," Vivian noted afterward. "You maintained cover even when surprised by the security protocol shift we introduced. Your handling of the unexpected elevator scenario was particularly effective." As the final assessment approached, training intensified further. Candidates now developed their own cover identities, creating backstories, mannerisms, and complete psychological profiles. For his final assessment, Matthias was assigned a complex extraction mission. The scenario, a high-value intelligence asset needed to be identified and removed from a formal diplomatic function without alerting hostile surveillance. For this operation, you'll need to create a cover identity that can access the highest levels of the event, the mission briefer explained. The extraction window is narrow, and multiple foreign intelligence services will be present. Matthias spent 3 days developing his approach. He created a complete identity for Ashlyn Winters, now a wealthy philanthropist with connections to international diplomatic circles. Every detail was meticulously crafted, from her educational background to her preference for French perfume. On the night of the assessment, Matthias underwent his most comprehensive transformation yet. The makeup artist worked for nearly 2 hours, creating subtle contours that reshaped his face entirely. The blonde wig was styled in an elegant updo that elongated his neck and emphasized the delicate earrings that caught the light. The emerald evening gown had been selected with tactical considerations in mind. The fitted bodice created a convincing feminine silhouette, while the flowing skirt concealed a specialized holster and extraction tools. 4-inch heels completed the ensemble, along with a matching clutch that contained communication equipment disguised as cosmetics. "Remember," Vivian said, as she inspected his final appearance. "Tonight isn't about passing as female. It's about being so convincingly Ashlyn that no one questions your presence or authority." The assessment took place in an elaborate mansion that had been set up to simulate a diplomatic reception. Veteran agents played various roles: foreign dignitaries, security personnel, waitstaff, and the asset requiring extraction. None knew which of the guests was actually a candidate in disguise. The moment Matthias entered the grand ballroom, he was Ashlyn completely. The weeks of training crystallized into fluid performance. He navigated the crowd with practiced ease, the emerald gown catching the light as he moved. His voice maintained the precise pitch and cadence he'd perfected, his laugh authentic when engaged in conversation. "Ms. Winters, I don't believe we've met," said an older gentleman with a Russian accent, one of the senior instructors playing the role of a foreign intelligence officer.
"The pleasure is mine,"
Matthias responded in Ashlyn's cultivated voice.
"I believe we share an interest in the Baltic Restoration Project. Perhaps we could discuss it further."
Throughout the evening, he gathered intelligence, identified surveillance patterns, and eventually located the asset, a nervous-looking woman by the bar wearing a distinctive pearl brooch. The extraction required precise timing. Creating a minor distraction involving spilled champagne, Matthias guided the asset through a service corridor, transitioned her to a secure location, and completed the mission objectives without raising alarms. When the assessment concluded, the candidates gathered for debriefing. Director Harlow herself had observed the operation. "Remarkable work," she said, addressing Matthias directly. "Several of our veteran operators were completely convinced by your cover. One even attempted to obtain intelligence from you, not realizing you were the candidate." The following week, final assignments were distributed. Matthias received orders to join the Specialized Infiltration Division, an elite team focused on high-risk penetration of hostile organizations. "Your particular skills make you invaluable for certain mission profiles," Director Harlow explained during his personal briefing. "Your ability to transform so completely gives us access to environments and situations previously difficult to penetrate." His first official mission came 3 weeks later. A sophisticated criminal network operating across Europe had proven impervious to traditional infiltration methods. Their security protocols were designed specifically to identify federal agents. "They screen extensively for male operatives," the mission director explained. "Their leadership is exclusively male, and they've developed effective countermeasures against conventional undercover approaches." The mission required Matthias to become Catherine Moore, personal assistant to a wealthy investor with ties to the organization. The role would provide access to inner circle meetings, normally closed to outsiders. The transformation process had become second nature. The blonde wig now featured subtle highlights, styled in a professional shoulder-length cut appropriate for Catherine's role. His wardrobe consisted of tailored business attire, charcoal pencil skirts, silk blouses in muted tones, and modest heels suitable for long periods of standing and walking. For 3 months, Matthias lived as Catherine. He maintained cover through countless security screenings, intimate social gatherings, and intense scrutiny. The criminal organization never suspected that the efficient, somewhat reserved personal assistant was gathering evidence that would eventually dismantle their entire operation. When the mission concluded successfully, Matthias expected to return to his male identity. Instead, Director Harlow had different plans. "Your performance exceeded all expectations," she said during his debriefing.
"We have another situation that requires your particular expertise. Immediate deployment."
Over the next year, Matthias completed 4 major operations in his feminine cover identities. Each mission built upon his growing expertise, from Ashlyn to Catherine, to Rebecca to Emma. Each persona became more refined, more authentic. Between missions, he remained in the secure compound, training and preparing for the next assignment. During a rare period between operations, Dr. Reynolds requested a meeting. "Your psychological evaluations show something interesting," she said, reviewing his file. "The extended periods in deep cover are having effects we hadn't fully anticipated." Matthias sat across from her desk, dressed in training clothes, the first time he'd worn male attire in months.
"What kind of effects?"
he asked. "Typically, operatives experience a form of psychological strain when maintaining cover identities for extended periods. They need decompression time to reconnect with their base identity." She looked up from the file. "You're showing the opposite pattern. Your stress indicators increase when you return to your male identity, and decrease when you're in your feminine covers." The observation struck him with unexpected force. He'd noticed feeling increasingly uncomfortable during the brief periods between missions when he returned to presenting as Matthias. The masculine clothing felt restrictive in new ways. The short haircut exposed features he'd grown accustomed to softening. Even his natural voice felt foreign in his throat.
"We've seen this before in a small percentage of deep cover specialists," Dr. Reynolds continued. "Sometimes the cover identity becomes more authentic to the operative than their original persona."
2 days later, Matthias sat in Director Harlow's office for an unusual meeting. "Your effectiveness in the field is unparalleled," she said without preamble. "However, Dr. Reynolds has brought concerns about your long-term psychological integration." Matthias nodded, unsurprised. "The transitions between identities have become challenging." "We have 2 options," Harlow explained. "We can remove you from deep cover operations, transition you to intelligence analysis or training, or..." She slid a folder across the desk. "Or we can formalize your specialized role, create a permanent cover identity for domestic operations. No more transitions back and forth." Matthias opened the folder. Inside was a complete identity package for Ashley Morgan, diplomatic security specialist with clearance for classified operations.
"This would be permanent?" he asked. "For operational purposes, yes. Ashley would be your primary identity for all professional functions. The psychological strain of constant transitions would be eliminated."
That evening, Matthias stood in his quarters, contemplating the decision before him. On his bed lay 2 sets of clothing, the male training uniform he'd worn for years. Beside it, a woman's pantsuit in charcoal gray with a pale blue blouse, the proposed wardrobe for Ashley Morgan. He thought about the past year, the missions, the transformations, the growing disconnect he felt when returning to his male presentation. Something had shifted fundamentally. The versions of himself that felt most authentic now wore blonde hair styled in soft waves, spoke in a practiced feminine cadence, and moved through the world in a completely different way. The next morning, Matthias met with Director Harlow to deliver his decision. When he entered her office, he wore the charcoal pantsuit, blonde hair styled professionally, makeup applied with practiced precision.
"I see you've made your choice,"
Harlow observed. "Ashley Morgan reporting for duty, Director," she replied, her voice steady in its feminine register. "I believe I can be most effective in this configuration." "Very well." Harlow handed over new credentials. "Welcome to your new permanent assignment, Agent Morgan." 6 months later, Ashley Morgan stood in her apartment in Washington, D.C., preparing for a high-level security briefing at the State Department. The transition had been surprisingly smooth. Her colleagues in the specialized division understood the unusual nature of her position. Many had experience with deep cover operations themselves. She selected a navy blazer from her closet, pairing it with a cream shell and matching slacks. Her blonde hair fell in soft waves around her face, now a familiar sight in the mirror. The makeup routine that once took hours now required only minutes: foundation, subtle contour, mascara, and a natural lip color appropriate for government meetings. As she fastened small pearl earrings, her secure phone chimed with a message. "Operation Clearwater approved. Briefing at 0900. Ashley smiled slightly. Her unique background had made her invaluable for certain types of operations, particularly those involving infiltration of organizations with strong gender biases. Her particular path had created capabilities few other operatives possessed. The person who had once been Matthias Sullivan existed now only in classified personnel files. Ashley Morgan moved through the world with confidence, her transformed identity no longer a cover, but a reality that had become more authentic than what came before. She checked her appearance one final time, straightened her blazer, and headed for the door. Another mission awaited, and Ashley Morgan was precisely the person needed to complete it. In the 6 years that followed, Ashley Morgan became one of the agency's most decorated specialists. Her ability to move seamlessly through different social contexts and security environments proved invaluable for national security operations. The transformation that began as a training module had created something unexpected, an operative uniquely qualified for a new era of intelligence challenges. On rare occasions, when reviewing old files, Ashley would encounter photographs of Matthias Sullivan. The face looked familiar yet distant, like a relative she'd lost touch with long ago. The male identity had served its purpose, creating the foundation for who she had become. But the woman who now carried multiple diplomatic credentials, who had infiltrated terrorist cells and disrupted human trafficking networks, who commanded respect in high-level security briefings, she was undeniably Ashley Morgan. Her blonde hair had become something of a signature, recognized in secure facilities throughout Washington. The precise cut framed features that had softened naturally over years of hormone therapy, a medical protocol eventually approved to maintain her cover identity permanently. Director Harlow, now approaching retirement, occasionally reflected on the unusual career trajectory of one of her most successful recruits. "Morgan represents an evolution in our approach," she told the Oversight Committee during a classified briefing. "What began as a specialized disguise capability transformed into something more profound, an operative whose unique background provides unprecedented access and effectiveness." For Ashley, the journey had long since transcended questions of disguise or performance. The training that began with makeup and voice modulation had revealed something that perhaps had always existed beneath the surface, an authentic self finally given permission to emerge. As she entered the secure briefing room for her next mission, nodding to colleagues who knew her only as Ashley, she reflected briefly on the strange path that had led her here. The transformation that began as professional necessity had ultimately revealed a more fundamental truth. Sometimes becoming someone else is actually the process of becoming yourself. "Agent Morgan," the mission director greeted her. "We've got a situation that requires your particular expertise." Ashley took her seat at the table, opened her briefing materials, and focused on the mission ahead. The navy blazer she wore matched the professionalism in her voice as she responded, "I'm ready. Let's begin."
Thanks for watching, my girlies. Be sure to check out Patreon for more.